Welcome. It is March 12th. Winter's in its last throes. You are watching Direct Line Live. Our special guest tonight, Ethan Gutmann from the Victims of Communism Foundation, China expert and investigative journalist. Our guests tonight are Bonnie Glick from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and Mark Unkelfer. Take it away, guys.
Well, welcome, and it's great to be on the show, and we've got lots to talk about because we've certainly had a momentous couple of weeks on foreign policy. Ethan, off the top of your mind, what are your takes as to the impact that the Trump administration is going to have with our relations with China?
Well, everything's up in the air, isn't it? Okay, so let's start there. And every hour, sometimes there's a new development. The interesting thing is that we're already starting to see a reaction in Russia to, in other words, the Russia-China embrace has been broken already. So a lot of people are looking at this and saying, well, the Russians aren't really going to stop the war with Ukraine or whatever. There's a big question. The press is sort of ginning that up. But the word on the ground, and this is coming really from Chinese sources, is that the Chinese people who are visiting, who are doing business in Russia and so forth, are running into terrible problems at the borders. In other words, they used to be able to walk right through. They were kind of honored guests. Not now. Now suddenly, sometimes they'll get through the border, but then they'll get stopped on the way to the parking lot, and they'll suddenly have to give a big bribe. Now that was unthinkable for the last couple of years. All right, the security forces in Russia were probably told very explicitly not to do things like that and to treat the Chinese with special respect. That's gone, and the Chinese are noticing this. Well, the way Chinese people do, they notice any indignity and they kind of magnify it. But I think it's pretty significant. That's a little tiny bit of information which says a lot to me, that the Russians are moving on very quickly here. So, when I brought up this a couple of weeks ago, I sort of said a couple of weeks ago, a kind of liberal friend of mine, and he was saying, what is Trump doing? He's just so attracted to dictators, blah, 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 And I said, well, maybe there's a strategy here. And maybe the strategy is that China is the number one threat. Russia is very much the little Satan in this picture, okay? And I'm sorry, that's a joke. And that what Trump is trying to do is break up the old crowd and isolate and do very different things to different countries. Probably what he intends to do on Iran, I don't know, but I don't expect it'll be the same outcome that Russia's going to get. Now, if that's going to work or not, I have no idea, and so forth. But as we saw with Zelensky, these things have a way of turning around. So suddenly all the pressure's on Russia all of a sudden, right? Because Zelensky has, the deal's been basically has been made. So I think this is a profound change for China. There's one other factor. And this is, again, on the edge of, I'm sorry to just indulge in rumors right now, but we really don't have a lot in terms of hard information on this. It appears that there has been a kind of a mini coup inside China, and that Xi Jinping is no longer fully in control. We're reading that through a lot of tea leaves, a lot of sort of slight public indignities that happened right around the time of the Chinese New Year's, the Spring Festival. Various signs that the media wasn't really on his side, or was at least taking orders from other players. That we don't know who's in control fully, and that's all we can say at this point. But that would be interesting, because that would mean that the 2027 we must solve the Taiwan problem by 2027 would no longer necessarily, that might be a relic. And that we're looking at a very soft coup in China. look, this, on the other hand, this is something you hear a lot.
Yeah.
This has been rumors that have been going around. People like to spread rumors in China to make them come true, especially among the dissident community. So I really can't vouch for it at this point. I can say that it's something to consider. And I think if you look at it this way, Russia moving into the American sphere or moving closer to America might have been a catalyst in China for a leadership change. Might. I'm really sorry. This is a difficult period to analyze anything in China right now. It's not front and center. We've got terrible reportage coming out of there. I mean, they're really miserable reporters. The New York Times is an all-time low. We don't have people who really even speak the language in that country right now. And as you know, the business community is lock, stock, and barrel kind of lifted up and gone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting also. That's another thing when Europe starts talking about, well, we don't really have to be, dependent on America anymore. And maybe we can, and they sort of start, maybe we can trade with China. It's like, well, you sort of picked the wrong time. On the other hand, maybe, nobody else is going to the party. So who knows? Maybe the hors d'oeuvres are right there on the table. I don't know, but I do think that this looks like a very bad time to be getting involved with China, particularly since their energy consumption has just gone down for the last 2 months. Now, that's a signal that, often you will see the GDP figures won't shift at all, or they will maybe go down a little bit or something like that. But this is actually a decline in energy usage, and it's significant. It's 2.5 to 5%, as I remember it. Okay, that indicates that things are grinding down. We've only seen that twice before in the last 30 years. Okay, and each time it signaled a really deep recession. Okay, that we only knew about well after it was gone, like a year or two later. Okay, and so that's certainly something to watch. The energy consumption does not lie, or it's harder to lie about that figure than almost any other economic figure in China.
Well, we've seen there's kind of a whack-a-mole where a statistic sort of gets discovered as a way of tracking China's performance, and then they try and figure out a way to falsify it, and we have to move on to the next statistic. You've given us a lot to digest. Bonnie, let me give you the opportunity to give me the first shot. Yeah, no, I've got a whole bunch of threads I want to pick up on, but go ahead. Bonnie, your thoughts?
I will say I love listening to Ethan. Every time we're together, I learn so much, and it's not just sort of opinion. It's factual, and what you described just now, Ethan, about a possible mini coup in China, and that Xi Jinping maybe is not the supreme leader that he had been before. It almost sounds like, and the reporting coming out is being so limited, and the business environment has so many fewer Western business interests represented in China. It almost sounds like the Soviet Union was. Of course, the economy is still the second largest in the world, so not like the Soviet Union ever was, but just that closure and the lack of information. I mean, prior to, and I will say, the signal being the Trump presidency on many levels, prior to the Trump presidency, China was regularly spewing out its statistics. You couldn't get enough statistics out fast enough because they used every single statistic to show how much better China was doing than America. And now, and everyone we know in America was asleep at the wheel, and there was no pushback. There were policy directions that were taken, and they were all very sort of hoity-toity diplomatic, and didn't lead to a way to address the competition that we have economically with China. So it's so fascinating to me to hear you talk about the the signals that are coming out of China. And I think your comment too about the decrease in energy consumption over the last few months is very telling, because this was also in the winter. And that in a normal country is when energy consumption goes up, right? It's cold in China. You're on mute, Ethan.
Oh, I am?
Yeah, there you are. Now you got it.
You're okay. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's really a great point. I mean, the winter point. I was actually, looking at some green website, which was claiming that this was the hottest year on record, and we never had a winter so warm in the world, and so forth. So I was looking at that map very carefully to see, well, what happened in China, because it was pretty cold here in the United States, but whatever. But apparently in Antarctica, where there are no measurements, it was was the Sahara. This
All right, no doubt.
No, that may be true. I don't know. But the point is that I was looking at China. It didn't look very out of the ordinary. I mean, so that's one of the things I was wondering about, was this is energy consumption. But most of this energy consumption is for industry. Okay. That's the big boys here that really count. And don't forget, I mean, when we talk about, a lot of people are still using coal, and a lot of that's mined. It just comes right in. Isn't even imported. It's just something that people use on a constant basis, especially in the big cities.
Right.
All right. So what if that's happening? I want to caution again. I am trying to use signals that I've learned to use by doing human rights in China, essentially. Okay. I've never been as interested in as a businessman in China, I pretty much ignored the statistics that were coming out.
They were fake. Yeah.
Because it was bad for my clients. I mean, my client would be like, oh, tapioca production's up. And I'm like, well, that's what they say.
Yeah.
But, that might be actually kind of political. And it turns out it is. So, it has something to do with other tapioca producers in Asia. All right. And so it's a sort of a little message that China's sending. All right, so if you can't use the stats, what do you use? And Mark, you're absolutely right. You got to look for the signals. Now, sometimes you can never use a signal like energy consumption. That's a one-trick pony. You can use it once, maybe even twice, but you're never going to get to use it a third time. But time is long for the Chinese. This is a very dynamic country. And so I guess they've kind of forgotten that. And they did come out with these stats. Now, we don't know what youth unemployment is, because I think it was a year ago on this program, we were talking about that this is not, youth unemployment's no longer recorded. It doesn't exist in China, apparently. So the whole live black movement, is being completely ignored at this point, and is simply a TikTok phenomenon. Okay. But
I was going to say,
sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
I was going to make the observation that if there is some internal dissension or disease control is weakening, then one of the indications could well be that some of the statistics that undermine the Z are more likely to surface, and that becomes a sort of an indicator of a political change as well as reflecting obviously the economic circumstance.
Yeah, although from the dissident perspective, they like to make a big production of anything that happens in China. And the fact is, there has been a lot of restive student movements recently. This big bike riding thing where they'd all go off and ride a bike in the middle. Well, I mean, what's the difference in that and a lot of people cramming themselves into a VW and back in the 50s or eating goldfish? I mean, really, that's crazy kids, right? They never even figured out what that movement exactly was. Okay. Just that it was a way of saying we're poor, we don't have a lot of money, and we don't have anything to do with our time, and we can be kind of unified. And those were the signals. Well, so what do we do with that? I don't know. But there have been a couple of other movements like that. There's several high schools which have almost gone up in flames over the fact that they won't allow them to take the weekends off. Okay, so the studying is now 13 days and maybe one day off on the 14th day. And that's what God said, on the 14th day you should rest. The Communist Party. So we don't know, but there are some signs of restive the rest of nature, that's very hard for me to gauge. I'm not on the ground. If I was on the ground in China, I could feel that pulse. I swear to God, there's things you pick up in a totalitarian state that you don't in a complicated place like America or European states or even Japan for that matter. You feel it on the ground. You feel rumors. You feel a certain tension. And it's very hard to determine if that's taking place. But if it is, it wouldn't be surprise me that much because Xi Jinping has never been all that bright. I think there's been a movement for a long time to at least push him down a bit and to start looking for a replacement. But they don't want to go into an outright war of any kind or have these things spill out. Obviously, in a totalitarian state, changing leaders is the most difficult thing in the world. It's a real crisis, okay? And to get through it smoothly is a kind of miracle, all right? I mean, it makes any business we have with elections or hanging chads look like nothing, what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, there are always somebody starts moving the tanks at some point in the middle of the night. So I'm very curious about that, but I don't know what to make of it exactly. I do believe that if Russia, it's interesting from the neoconservative perspective. And in many ways, that's where my background is as a neoconservative. And from the neoconservative perspective, that perspective said, well, if Russia has to really lose in Ukraine, otherwise China will be empowered. Right. In other words, if Russia just gets their hand slapped or something like that, that's not enough. They've got to lose. You've got to rub their nose in this. I'm not sure that was right. It may be that this somewhat softer approach of giving them a bit of a face-saving out that Trump is seemingly proposing, and at the same time sort of saying, I'm going to make you richer. We're going to get rid of some of the restrictions on your economy and so forth. And we're going to make you wealthier. We're going to try to, I can maybe bring you in. I can introduce you to a few people. Maybe that will do the same thing that we thought. That's
well. If I just Elbridge Colby in his book, The Strategy of Denial, which comes from the realist, very very hard-nosed realist perspective, and his nomination is somewhat on hold because of some of his views on, I think, in the Middle East. But in his book, the Strategy of Denial, he does. It's not a big part of it, but it is a component of it, of having a stronger relationship with Russia is, but his point is our focus should be China, 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 and everything else is secondary. But he does weave into the discussion about Russia potentially as maybe not an ally, but as a something of a bulwark within obviously the Asian continent to China, and sets that up as being one of an element to a strategy to contain China. Now, his focus is China, 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 and secondary to all of that is, of course, Taiwan, where he sees as the primary flashpoint, the primary point of concern for the future.
I think too, Mark and Ethan, the use of Russia as a bulwark against China, or as a foil on some level as well, is so Trumpy in the sense that he does the unpredictable. And often, usually, with really great success. And so that whole blow up in the Oval Office with Zelensky, which was really designed to say America's the alpha male and everybody else is like omega level, not even a beta, but America is the biggest dog. And Zelensky realized that, as did Israel, without having to be embarrassed like Zelensky was. But what Trump has done in these just 7 weeks since he's taken office is really cowed the dictators. And whereas they ran roughshod over Biden and the absence of any kind of government for 4 years in the United States, and certainly the absence of any kind of power, and now they want to hear what the United States has to say. And this strategy of mixing and matching geographies is the kind of thing that makes people's brains in the State Department explode, because they can only focus on one geography at a time. If you do Russia, Ukraine, you only do Russia, Ukraine, and you'll spice it up with a little bit of NATO. But you certainly would not bring in Saudi Arabia. And President Trump has Russia and Ukraine negotiating a ceasefire in Saudi Arabia. That's so unique, and it's literally, sometimes you just need to change the scenery to get people to see things differently. And part of me thinks that that's his strategy, but I think a bigger piece of his strategy is to be so unpredictable that it almost forces, in this case, the Russians and the Ukrainians to have a conversation, because at the end of the day, neither country knows which side the United States is going to favor. And they're better off, and this I also think is his approach, they're better off each giving up a little and accepting that they're going to have to give up a little, which is hard, right? I mean, most people in the United States, most being at least over 50%, really have been amazed by Ukraine and its progress against Russia. But I think also Americans are pretty pragmatic, and Trump's policy is the pragmatists, he calls it common sense all the time. The common sense response is stop killing each other. It doesn't always fly, right? We're not engaged in a hot war, so we're not losing our soldiers and our treasure. These two countries are. And so it's a little bit harder to stomach, but changing that ambiance and bringing in these unplanned, uncalculated in anyone's thinking actors. And you know that Saudi Arabia, while hosting, is also looking for, okay, and where do we play in this? And it gives ownership over a crisis to a broader spectrum, a really much broader spectrum of countries and actors than we had prior. Prior, it's NATO, Ukraine, Russia, and now it's, well, there are oil interests, and Saudi brings in OPEC countries, and it just changes the calculus. And that's, I think in general, that's the Trump MO. It actually was in his first term as well. And it leads to tremendous movement. And the key is channeling that movement to make sure that it's going in a way that is directly aligned with our national security interests.
Well, I think the Belt and Road Initiative, right, is this toy that the Chinese have kind of left lying around in a lot of countries at this point. And it seems to be a real failure, and the only place they seemingly are intending to carry it out is in, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan to some extent, and so forth. And maybe, if they had a chance, in Siberia. So I think that Trump is the man of the hour in this sense. What, in the same way you were just describing it. I mean, he doesn't hold the meeting in Potsdam. He holds it in Saudi Arabia, and that does change the atmosphere, actually. And it's much better than Erdogan too. Much better than doing it in Turkey. Okay, that would have been a kind of a disaster.
Yeah.
But he's also double playing it. Saudi Arabia is also the big part of whatever peace agreement's going to come out in the Middle East at some point, if it does. But clearly, that's the deal that everybody's been looking at for a long time. That's the deal that Hamas and really Iran went out of their way, and China, to prevent.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is, and I don't know that this is part of policy, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if our Secretary of State, Rubio, had not thought of this. One of the intel things that we received, it's not even big intel, it was kind of well known, was there was a major paper put out, and I don't remember the guy's name, a Chinese scholar, but a popular one. And he put out a paper saying the strategy for us is to involve America in several unwinnable wars. Okay, wars that will bog down. And we need one in Europe, and we need one in the Middle East. And we'll probably need one in Asia as well. Okay, but we'll start with those. We need one in Europe, one in the Middle East. Immediately, what happens? China has been running this coalition, whatever you want to call it, axis of evil, I don't care, whatever you want to call it, really has been running this with Russia, Iran, to some extent North Korea as a junior partner, right, for a while. And they have been calling the shots. And the idea was, well, the minute the Ukraine situation started getting truly under control, that's when the Middle East starts up. That's when Hamas makes its move. I think this is all very straightforward. I don't think you have to be a genius to see that all goes to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Simply, they looked at Afghanistan. They said, this is a retreat. It's as clear as a bell. And now is our time. This is the time we make the move. And Russia decided to go first. I mean, there was a little bit of doubling on that, because Russia, as a junior partner, said, I'll go first, and that will give me more power in this situation, in this partnership, because I'll be very successful and I'll do it very quickly.
Right.
And it's a much easier grab. And Ukraine is much easier than taking Taiwan. All right. And much less threat to the homeland. All right. So that's the way I think this all developed. But I think Trump has been remarkable because he's kept it away from just being a European situation and just a NATO situation. And in fact, the very things he wants for NATO are going to happen probably anyways, because the Europeans, this is the only thing that could possibly get them to spend more money on the defense, as far as I can tell. Not even the Russian threat does it to them.
Right.
But the rage at Trump.
The rage, yes.
The rage at Trump is enough that they can actually, get their population to say, sure, we'll spend some more money. We're not going to be pushed around like that. Not like that guy Zelensky. Okay, we don't want that situation. So, and I'm not even convinced the Zelensky thing was planned, by the way. That's not my take on it. That was all some sort of kabuki play. I don't believe that.
Yeah.
I believe nobody behaved that well, truthfully, in that office. And Trump hadn't behaved very well before the meeting by saying, they started it, and, various others. What was the other statement? He said they started it.
The dictator comment.
The dictator comment. Yeah, okay, he's a dictator, right? He's not holding elections. He's a dictator, therefore. But, so that wasn't a great opener, although he did make an attempt to say, did I say that he was a dictator? I don't remember saying that.
Right.
Okay, fine. But reasonable. That's going along reasonably. He was actually behaving very well. What Vance was doing, I love Vance, but I don't know what the hell he was doing there. It's like, literally, it was like, you stay out of this argument. It's me and your mother are talking, okay? It's like, that's exactly the reaction I would have had. Okay. It's like, don't get in on the act here. So I think the whole thing was, but it's weird how jiu-jitsu, because it did turn into, now it's become a really effective way to pressure Russia. Now, I don't think China can be pressured these ways. I don't think Trump's tricks are going to work very well. I think they're Western tricks. They work with reasonably Western people, okay? But the psychology of the Chinese is so different. And I'm not sure I know how to handle them, okay? I found them, I've negotiated prices all over the world, just in markets and all kinds of things. And I've never found anyone that is so difficult to negotiate with, so clever as Chinese people. There's nobody like them. And I don't care if they're a peasant who's illiterate. They're good at it. It's a phenomenal thing within that culture. In fact, once I got back from China after being there for 3 years, I found myself trying to negotiate like that in Vermont. Here, the price is the fair price. It's a disaster. Okay.
What does the price tag say, Ethan? The price tag says it's $9.99. You're not going to get it for $9.96.
No, I would really get into this stuff. And they were just like, "What's wrong with you? I told you the price. It's a used car." Anyways, so I think this is going to be the real test is yet to come. I think but I am excited to see that they understand that China is really the main event here, and everything is really revolving around that. And the Taiwanese also have done a very intelligent thing just to avoid the tariffs. They came out with this business of bringing over some chips. Right here, we're going to set up a chip factory here in the United States. Instead of saying the only thing that is holding us together as a country, the only way is for us to keep this completely secret, they did something else, which is we're going to bring something over to you. We're bringing this big gift, okay, and we're showing a level of trust that you're not going to just sort of run away with it, okay?
They kind of pulled a Trump, right? It's kind of a Trumpy. They kind of pulled a Trump on Trump.
Yeah, I thought it was really clever and smart to do that, and very proactive. The Taiwanese are in no position to defend themselves. I mean, we've talked about this before. They cannot get the budget going, even though they're the richest people in Asia right now per capita. They don't feel like it, most of them. Okay. And it's going to be very hard to get the rank and file to do that. Now, they have put in a real draft now. I mean, everybody's doing military service. If you're male, you're going to do military service. And so that is a change. It's a shift. But gee, it's late in the day.
Yeah.
For all that. I mean, it's just terribly late in the day. And they refuse to build a big military industrial complex to go into the situation that Israel has done, where you build a military industrial complex that's far bigger than your own country and you sell off the excess.
Yeah.
Right. But that's a great economic model for Israel, and it's shown its worth again and again. Okay.
Yeah.
The Taiwanese will not do it.
Yeah. The difference may be, well, there are a couple of differences there. The first is Taiwan has, in the lifetime of nearly everyone in Taiwan, they've never been at war. So they don't know what it's like to sacrifice their young men and women on the battlefield, whereas Israelis absolutely know that. But the other piece, and this is where the really deep socialist roots of Israel come in, and they aren't at play in Taiwan, and that is that the military-industrial complex is largely financed by the government at a loss, and it's not until they have, in pharma they'd call it a blockbuster drug. It's not until they have a blockbuster system that is purchased by countries all over the world that they can really claim victory and recoup some of those costs that went into the system development. And that's where Taiwan is missing the boat. They have to have a national, realization that they can't buy their way out of a war. They have to invest, and they have to be prepared in advance in order to deter enemies. And, whether it's building or buying weapon systems, their soldiers have to be trained on them. And they have to do reserve duty. There all of these things that when I meet with Taiwanese, they say, oh, yes, we're talking to the Israelis. No, stop talking. Model the Israeli model. That's what Taiwan has to do.
I mean, that's a big jump. I'm sorry. That was my line, was I'd say, what are you guys doing? They say, oh, Ethan, you have connections in DC. You help us to get the right people to talk to. I'm like, why would you want to talk to DC right now? You've got two countries which are examples, Ukraine and Israel. Send people over there, figure out what they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Learn
This
and
is
do it.
always my response. But they're doing it now. According so your information is more current, and they're actually going over and talking to the Israelis. How do you do it?
Yeah. They, or at least they're saying that they want to adopt the Israeli model. And also the Israeli model is better than the Ukrainian model just because, plain and simple, Israel is winning. But Ukraine, the extraordinary thing that Ukraine is doing is building this drone army, which is something that Taiwan absolutely needs to invest in like gangbusters, because they don't have the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. The People's Liberation Army of China is bigger than the entire population of Taiwan, I imagine. And so they have to have an alternative, and they have to fight a very different kind of war, more akin to the Ukraine model with Russia.
With strong defensive systems that the Ukrainians have really done a great job of improvising and developing.
Yeah. And on the attack with these drones, and long-range drones, and understanding what collateral damage looks like, and how to extract as much damage off of the island and onto the mainland as possible.
Well, I think the key thing is it all comes down. It is one of these situations where it really would come down to us, the U.S.
Yeah, for sure.
It comes down to our submarine sitting in that strait, and all they have to do is knock out a couple of ships, just a couple.
Yeah.
Well, and that actually, to the Colby book that I referred to earlier, discusses the notion that what the strategy is for Taiwan is to delay with defensive action long enough to allow for collective action on the allies, including the United States, obviously Japan and the Philippines and others, to be able to respond and, in effect, to be prepared to do a holding action. I do think I hope we didn't drop the lead, because you led off with some insights or potential insights about where's the political standing of Xi, and we've kind of gone off on some very interesting. But I wanted to come back to that, because that really is certainly interesting. I will say that I saw on a particularly one of these unreliable social media sites a video of Xi seeming to shake in the most recent parliament meetings, and they were trying to draw conclusions from that, which I guess was perhaps an inkling of what you were going to suggest, because that was what they were saying, is that he looked shaky, he looked uncomfortable. And again, the videos that you see 30 seconds, I'm not sure how much stock to put in it. But I did want to throw that out. But I also wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to do a little speculation as to what might be the next steps, what might next happen in China, if in fact this is a scenario that needs to play out or is going to play out.
Well, again, this is what's so difficult is you talk about shakiness. Remember Putin? How bad that guy looked for a while, okay? He clearly was. He was clearly very unhealthy. Whether it was cancer, blood cancer, it wasn't quite clear, but it was pretty dicey.
That's a great analogy to how reliable that stuff is, yes.
Yeah, so...
Oops, Ethan, I think you may have frozen.
Yeah, it looks like he's frozen. Let me see if we can't get him unfrozen. Hold on 1 second. Yeah.
Can you say something, Ethan? I'll pick up on his line, Mark, and
there we go.
That is true, that it's very hard to see a photo of someone who may have the flu or who may just be so enraged that his hand is shaking a little bit. It is hard to know, or he may have some condition. this concept, you've opened, I think, Ethan, our eyes very widely to now follow more closely the nuances that are coming out of China as they relate to Xi Jinping, and it'll be fascinating, I think, to watch and observe and see what's in the offing, because former leaders of the Chinese Communist Party are not really treated very well, would you say? And they do not go gentle into that good night. So it'll be potentially a very rough road ahead if there is a leadership change, a lot of disruption in global markets, but also internally in China, in all likelihood.
Yes, I mean, there is one other tiny sign, which is apparently this business like Jack Ma, and basically the big entrepreneurs, the Elon Musks of China, keep disappearing and kind of coming back in a kind of, looking a bit different and so forth. I mean, that's what kind of prompted me when you were saying that, Bonnie, was the thing about sort of seeing something wrong with somebody or somebody's been through something. That apparently is maybe a sign that Xi Jinping is no longer fully in control, because they've sort of stopped that recently. It's late in the day to stop that. I mean, China has slowed down its own development over the last decade dramatically. I mean, think of the things that they put the real money into, the real resources. Belt and Road Initiative, disaster. Okay. It hasn't worked out for anyone, as far as I can tell, very well, and it hasn't won them any friends. It's just a phenomenal thing. So Belt and Road Initiative, the other, the attempt to resolve the Uyghur problem has completely blown up in their face. I mean, not as much as I'd like.
Yeah.
That's why I'm writing my book with the Xinjiang procedure and so forth, but because it should blow up a lot harder on them for this. But it is true that they have not solved the problem. They did not, they still have a chance. If they get into a war, they can really wipe out half the Uyghurs, anybody they consider problematic. And mostly we won't know about it.
Right.
But for now, they really have, they've got them down to zero population growth. There's absolutely, and it's probably below that. It's below low replacement level. They have a vast amount of people, about 500,000 to 1 million, who are being used for forced labor. Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of organs coming out of those people, their bodies. So they are selecting people. And that's probably only about 25 or 50,000 a year, somewhere in that range. But it's a phenomenal figure, and it's all about 28, 29 years old people. So these are the most vital people of any, if there were an independence movement, these are the people who would run it. So I think that's one thing I did want to bring up as a kind of side note. One of the things I've been kind of interested in this book, and I didn't want to make it the main focus of the book, because, we've been talking. I like to use facts. I like to, use other people's testimony and so forth, and I don't like to go out on a limb and my feelings about this stuff so much. But as I write this, I become convinced that there's no way that the Uyghurs can go back into the fold in China. This is just too, what's been done to them is so dramatic that they're a lot like the Jews. They can't really be part of Poland or Germany or any place like that anymore. There's no going home from that. And so we are going to have to, I would like to see, and Trump is a guy who might consider this. I don't think Rubio is so much, but he's a little more cautious. But Trump is the kind of guy who might look at this and kind of go, you know what, down the road, that's what you're going to have to do.
Yeah.
You're going to have a free Tibet. You're going to have to, or a Tibet, okay, and a real autonomous region. And you're going to have a Uyghurstan or East Turkestan,
right,
that is independent. okay, that basically acts like a Central Asian nation, okay, that gives us tribute, doesn't cause us problems, but has some kind of the same relationship basically they have with Kyrgyzstan, okay. And a Finlandization is not so bad, okay. It's given the alternatives, right? Yeah. Because you live to play another day. Look at Finland now, right? So I've begun to feel I don't want to make it again the main focus of what I do or whatever, but this comes from my heart. I really don't. I'm not comfortable looking at what they've done in that country, and to those people and the Kazakhs as well. There's a lot of Kazakhs in those camps. So I think to me, Central Asia is the big sleeper area. It's very important if American foreign policy is going to get serious about China, that we have to move back into that region. We really do.
And on that note, it's a fascinating way to kind of wrap up with this perspective on what wither China today, and also the Trump administration approach to China, Russia, Iran, the world's autocrats, dictators, and stay tuned for, we're just 7 weeks in. We got 4 more years to figure out a lot of this, and it's all vital stuff for our queries. Mark, I think you have a couple of announcements before we wrap.
Well, we're going to talk about, obviously, we would love going out to have to chew the fat on all of this at Masoni's restaurant up in Baltimore County. I know that sounds like a non sequitur, but you've been on the show before, so that is something that we do. And we obviously, for the club, have a First Thursday Pizza and Politics coming up in April. Looking forward to that, and encourage people to subscribe to our newsletter and to follow us on Substack. Bonnie, are you traveling? Do you want to mention where you're headed? Do you got any announcements to go yourself?
I'm heading to India because that's another huge player in the conversation about global power centers, and the steps that India takes in the next several years are going to be fascinating to watch, vis-a-vis us, vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis China. So stay tuned.
Thank you very much, Ethan, and it's always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Let's go down to Masoni's, where Italian cuisine shines. Let's go down to Masoni's, we'll have a good old time. Homemade pasta at Masoni's, sauces fresh and fine. Good friends gather at Masoni's, join us anytime. Taste the pizza at Masoni's, with flavor so divine. Bring your good times, appetite, join us anytime.